The massive lecture hall buzzed with dozens of different sounds as students from across the galaxy settled into their seats. Clicks, chirps, musical tones, and soft humming filled the air as creatures of every shape and size prepared for class. Some had feathers that changed color with their mood. Others had crystal bodies that glowed softly. A few looked like walking trees with leaves that rustled when they moved. Dr. Veltar walked to the front of the room, his 4 blue arms carrying data tablets and projection devices. He was a Kalari, one of the most respected species in the galaxy for their scientific knowledge. His large black eyes scanned the room as he set up his equipment. Today would be the start of his most famous lecture series, one that students talked about for years after graduation. In the very back row, almost hidden behind a group of tall, bird-like students, sat a young woman named Emily Watson. She had short brown hair and wore the same simple gray uniform as all the other students at the Galactic Academy of Sciences. But Emily was different from everyone else in the room in a way that none of them knew. She was human. Emily opened her tablet and prepared to take notes, just like she had done in dozens of classes before. She had been at the academy for 6 months now, and most students barely noticed her. She was quiet, polite, and always did her homework on time. Her professors liked her thoughtful questions. Her few friends thought she was a bit shy but very kind. What they didn't know was that Emily was the only human student in the entire academy. In fact, she was one of only a few hundred humans in all of Federation space. Her people were so new to galactic society that most species had never even heard of Earth. The room slowly grew quiet as Dr. Veltar finished setting up his holographic projector. He was known throughout the galaxy as the leading expert on dangerous worlds and the creatures that lived on them. Students came from hundreds of light years away just to hear his lectures. "Welcome, students, to Advanced Xenobiology," Dr. Veltar announced, his voice carrying easily through the whole sound system. "Today we begin our most important unit of study. We will explore Class 12 Deathworlds and the predators they create." A nervous flutter went through the crowd. Many of the students came from peaceful garden worlds where the most dangerous creature was something like a butterfly. The idea of truly deadly planets scared them. Emily kept her face calm and neutral, but inside she felt a strange mix of emotions. She knew exactly what her professor was going to talk about. She had lived it. Dr. Veltar activated his projector, and a spinning image of a dark, storm-covered planet appeared in the air above the students. Lightning flashed across its surface, and massive hurricanes swirled over angry oceans. "These worlds," the professor continued, "create the most terrifying predators in known space. Planets so hostile that only the strongest, smartest, and most dangerous creatures can survive. Every day is a battle. Every meal must be fought for. Every moment of weakness means death." Around Emily, students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A group of crystal beings dimmed their natural glow. The bird-like Threnody ruffled their colorful feathers nervously. She noticed that most of her classmates had eyes on the sides of their heads, the mark of prey animals. They were built to watch for danger, not to hunt. Emily's eyes, like all humans, faced forward. She was built to hunt. "Over the next 5 lectures," Dr. Veltar explained, "we will study these death worlds and their inhabitants. We will learn what makes them so dangerous. We will understand why the Galactic Federation watches for them constantly. And we will explore what would happen if such creatures ever made it into civilized space." A student near the front raised a tentacle-like appendage. "Professor, surely such creatures would be too primitive to ever develop space travel." Dr. Veltar shook his head sadly. "That is what makes them truly frightening," student Quillas. "The most dangerous Deathworld predators are not just strong and fast. They are intelligent. They make tools. They work together. They plan and scheme and adapt to any situation." Emily thought about human history, how her people had gone from using stone tools to traveling between stars in just a few thousand years. How they had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have wiped out most species. How they had learned to work together in groups of millions, all focused on a common goal. "Intelligence combined with predatory instincts," the professor continued, "creates something truly terrifying. A creature that doesn't just hunt for food, but hunts because it enjoys the challenge. A creature that sees every other being as either prey or competition." Emily frowned slightly. That didn't sound like humans at all. Her people were competitive, yes, but they also cared deeply about protecting others. Human soldiers died to save civilians they had never met. Human doctors worked themselves to exhaustion treating patients from species they barely understood. But she kept these thoughts to herself and continued taking notes. The lecture ended with Dr. Veltar promising that tomorrow they would begin building a profile of the theoretical perfect Deathworld predator. Emily packed up her tablet and prepared to leave with the crowd of nervous students. As she walked toward the door, she heard two Threnody students talking in worried chirps behind her. "Can you imagine meeting a real Deathworld predator?" one said. "I would probably die of fear before it could even attack me," the other replied. Emily almost smiled. If only they knew that they had been sitting 3 rows behind one for the entire lecture. The next day, Emily arrived at the lecture hall early and took her usual seat in the back row. She watched as her classmates filed in, their various forms of nervous chatter filling the space. The crystal-bodied Zelf students were dimmer than usual, while the feathered Threnody kept their colorful plumage close to their bodies. Word had spread about yesterday's introduction to Deathworld predators, and everyone seemed on edge. Dr. Veltar entered carrying a large holographic projector and several data tablets. His 4 arms moved quickly as he set up his equipment, clearly excited about today's lesson. Emily opened her tablet and prepared to take notes, wondering what her professor would say about the theoretical perfect predator he had promised to discuss. "Yesterday we talked about Deathworlds," Dr. Veltar began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Today we will design the ultimate predator. We will build it piece by piece, using logic and science to create the most dangerous creature possible." The holographic projector hummed to life, creating a simple wireframe figure in the air above the students. It was roughly humanoid in shape, though Dr. Veltar had not yet added any details. "First, the basic body plan," the professor announced. "Our perfect predator must be able to move quickly and efficiently. Bipedal locomotion allows for tool use while maintaining mobility. The arms are free to carry weapons, make traps, or manipulate the environment." Emily glanced down at her own bipedal form and free-moving arms. The holographic figure was starting to look uncomfortably familiar. Dr. Veltar manipulated the projection, adding details to the head region. "The eyes must face forward," he explained. "Binocular vision provides excellent depth perception for hunting. Prey animals have eyes on the sides of their heads to watch for danger. Predators have eyes that face forward to focus on their target." Around the lecture hall, dozens of prey species students unconsciously touched their own side-mounted eyes. Emily kept her forward-facing human eyes focused on her notes. "The teeth are crucial," the professor continued, adding dental details to the hologram. "Not the specialized fangs of a pure carnivore, which limit diet options. No, our perfect predator needs omnivorous teeth. Sharp canines for tearing meat, flat molars for grinding plant matter. This allows survival in any environment, eating anything available." Emily ran her tongue over her own omnivorous teeth, canines, incisors, and molars designed for exactly the diet Dr. Veltar was describing. She noticed several herbivorous students looking queasy at the mention of meat eating. A Threnody student raised a feathered wing. "Professor, wouldn't such dietary flexibility make the creature weak? Specialization usually means greater efficiency." Dr. Veltar nodded approvingly. "An excellent question, student Kira TH. But you are thinking like a prey species. Specialization works well in stable environments. But Deathworlds are not stable. Seasons change, food sources disappear, disasters strike. The survivor is not the one best adapted to current conditions, but the one who can adapt to new conditions quickly." Emily thought about human history, how her ancestors had survived ice ages by changing their diet, their tools, their entire way of life. How humans could live in frozen Arctic regions by eating seals and fish, then move to tropical jungles and survive on fruits and insects. Adaptability had been humanity's greatest strength. "Now for the most important part," Dr. Veltar said, his voice growing more serious. "The brain. Our perfect predator needs intelligence, but not just any intelligence. It needs the ability to plan, to remember, to learn from mistakes. But most dangerous of all, it needs emotions." Several students made sounds of confusion. A crystalline Zelf flickered nervously. "Professor, surely emotions would be a weakness? They cloud judgment and cause irrational behavior." Dr. Veltar's expression grew grave. "That is what makes them so terrifying. A purely logical predator will retreat when faced with superior numbers or better weapons. It will calculate the odds and choose survival over victory. But an emotional predator?" He paused for effect. "An emotional predator will fight impossible battles." The professor began pacing as he warmed to his subject. "Imagine a predator that forms emotional bonds with its pack members. When one of them is threatened, logic no longer matters. The predator will charge into certain death to save a friend. It will fight creatures 10 times its size, It will never give up, never retreat, never accept defeat. Emily thought of human parents who lifted cars off their trapped children, using strength that should have been impossible. She thought of soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their squad mates, or firefighters who ran into burning buildings to rescue strangers. The emotional component makes them unpredictable, Dr. Veltar continued. You cannot negotiate with them because their decisions are not based on logic. You cannot frighten them because they care more about their pack than their own safety. And you cannot defeat them because they will keep coming back, again and again, learning from each failure. A nervous Aquari student raised a tentacle. But Professor, how would such creatures hunt? Surely their emotions would interfere with efficient killing. Dr. Veltar smiled grimly and added new details to the hologram. They would be persistence hunters. Not the fastest predators, but the ones who never stop. They would track their prey for days, weeks if necessary. No matter how fast you run, how well you hide, they follow your trail. They don't need to be faster than you, they just need to be more determined. Emily knew this hunting style well. Humans had hunted mammoths and other massive prey not by overpowering them, but by chasing them until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. It was called persistence hunting, and it was one of humanity's oldest techniques. The perfect Deathworld predator, Dr. Veltar concluded, would combine intelligence, adaptability, emotional drive, and unstoppable determination. It would be the ultimate survival machine, capable of thriving in any environment and overcoming any obstacle. As the lecture ended, Emily looked around at her frightened classmates and realized her professor had just perfectly described every human who had ever lived. The third day of lectures drew an even larger crowd. Word had spread throughout the academy about Dr. Veltar's terrifying descriptions of the perfect Deathworld predator. Students who were not even enrolled in the class squeezed into the back of the hall, eager to hear about real encounters with such creatures. Emily took her usual seat, noticing how many of her classmates looked tired and worried. She had overheard several conversations in the dining halls about nightmares and trouble sleeping. The idea of actual predators existing in the galaxy was deeply disturbing to species that had evolved as peaceful herbivores. Dr. Veltar entered carrying a heavily secured data case marked with Galactic Federation warning symbols. The sight of it sent a ripple of nervous excitement through the crowd. These were classified files, real reports from the dangerous edges of known space. Today we move from theory to reality, the professor announced, his voice more serious than usual. What I am about to show you comes from actual Federation survey reports. These are not stories or legends. These are documented encounters with Deathworld predators. He activated his holographic projector and entered a complex security code. The first image that appeared was grainy security footage from what looked like a research station. Emily could see scientists running in panic while dark shapes moved through the corridors. This footage comes from Survey Station Omega 7, orbiting the planet Kepler 442b, Dr. Veltar explained. The planet appeared to be uninhabited when our teams first arrived. They were wrong. The video showed bipedal creatures moving with purpose through the station. They were roughly humanoid in shape, though the poor image quality made details hard to see. What struck Emily most was how they moved, not like mindless beasts, but with clear intelligence and coordination. The creatures we designated as Vorthak showed unprecedented tactical thinking, the professor continued. Watch how they move. This is not random violence. They are working together, following a plan. Emily watched the figures in the video split into groups, with some blocking escape routes while others systematically searched each room. It looked exactly like human military tactics, the same techniques taught in basic strategy courses on Earth. The most disturbing aspect was their use of tools, Dr. Veltar said, pausing the video on a frame showing one of the creatures holding what appeared to be an improvised weapon. They took equipment from our research station and modified it into weapons. This shows not just intelligence, but creative problem-solving under pressure. A Zelf student dimmed nervously. Professor, how did they know which equipment could be weaponized? Surely that would require understanding of our technology. Dr. Veltar nodded grimly. They observed us first. For weeks, possibly months, they watched our scientists work. They learned our routines, studied our technology, and planned their attack. When they finally struck, they knew exactly what they were doing. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The behavior Dr. Veltar described sounded disturbingly familiar. Humans had used similar tactics throughout their history, observing enemies, learning their weaknesses, then striking with precision. The difference was that humans tried to avoid unnecessary casualties. The professor switched to a new file. But the Vorthak incident pales compared to what happened on Zirion Prime. Here, we encountered a species that demonstrated the emotional bonding I discussed yesterday. The new footage showed a different research facility, this one clearly built for containing specimens. Emily could see holding cells and examination rooms typical of xenobiology labs. But something had gone wrong. The creatures we called Mordak were initially docile when captured, Dr. Veltar explained. Our scientists believed they were studying simple animals. Until they separated a mated pair for individual testing. The video showed what happened next. The separated Mordak had somehow escaped its cell and was moving through the facility with what could only be described as desperate fury. It smashed through barriers that should have held it easily, showing strength far beyond what the scientists had measured. Watch what happens when it reaches the other holding cells, the professor said quietly. On screen, the escaped Mordak began systematically freeing the other captured creatures. But it was not random, it was clearly searching for something specific. When it finally reached the cell containing its mate, the reunion was brief but touching, even across species lines. They did not just escape, Dr. Veltar continued. They launched a coordinated rescue mission to free all the other captured Mordak. 7 separate research stations were attacked simultaneously. The creatures somehow communicated across vast distances to organize their response. Emily thought about human rescue operations, where complete strangers risked their lives to save people they had never met. She thought about how humans would react if aliens captured and experimented on their families. The response would probably be swift, coordinated, and absolutely relentless. A Threnody student ruffled her feathers anxiously. Professor, how did they coordinate across such distances without advanced technology? Simple but effective methods, Dr. Veltar replied. Scent markers, basic tools for long-distance signaling, even primitive art forms that carried tactical information. But the key was motivation. They were not following orders from a central command. They were acting on genuine emotional bonds. The professor showed more footage, this time of Mordak using Federation equipment against their captors. Emily watched creatures that looked primitive but fought with intelligence and determination that would impress human military commanders. The emotional component made them unpredictable, Dr. Veltar explained. Our security protocols assumed logical behavior. When faced with superior firepower, most species retreat. But creatures motivated by love, by loyalty, by the need to protect their families? They keep fighting against impossible odds. Emily realized her professor was describing exactly how humans behaved. Every war in human history had stories of people fighting hopeless battles to protect others. The difference was that humans usually tried to find peaceful solutions first. As the lecture ended, she looked around at her terrified classmates and wondered what they would think if they knew one of these dangerous Deathworld predators had been sitting among them all along, taking careful notes about their fears. The 4th lecture hall was packed beyond capacity. Students sat in the aisles, stood along the walls, and even crowded around the doorways. News of Dr. Veltar's real footage of Deathworld predators had spread throughout the entire academy. Emily had to arrive 30 minutes early just to get her usual seat in the back row. The atmosphere was different today. Instead of the curious excitement of previous lectures, there was real fear in the air. Many students looked like they had not slept well. The crystalline Zelf were noticeably dimmer than usual, while the feathered Threnody kept their plumage pulled tight against their bodies in defensive postures. Dr. Veltar noticed the tension as he set up his equipment. He had decided to dedicate today's session entirely to answering student questions, knowing that the disturbing footage from yesterday had left many of them deeply worried. Before we continue, the professor began, I want to address the concerns I know many of you are feeling. The creatures I showed you yesterday exist on the very edges of known space. The chances of encountering them are extremely small. This seemed to calm some students, but hands and tentacles and various appendages were already shooting up around the room. Dr. Veltar pointed to a nervous-looking Nith near the front. Professor, the herbivorous student began in a shaky voice, you said these predators are intelligent and dangerous. But surely the Galactic Federation would never allow such creatures to join civilized society. Dr. Veltar nodded confidently. An excellent question, Student Morin. The Federation's screening processes are extremely thorough. Any species applying for membership undergoes extensive psychological and biological evaluation. The profiles of Deathworld predators would be unmistakable. He activated a holographic display showing various brain scans and behavioral charts. Aggressive tendencies, territorial instincts, predatory behavior patterns, all of these would be immediately obvious to our screening teams. Such creatures simply could not hide their nature. Emily shifted slightly in her seat, thinking about how humans had passed those same screening processes without any problems. She remembered the months of interviews, tests, and evaluations that had cleared humanity for Federation membership. The screening had focused on technological development and peaceful intentions, not on hunting instincts that humans had learned to control thousands of years ago. Another student, an equarry with nervous tentacles, raised a limb. But what if they tried to disguise their true nature? Could a predator species pretend to be peaceful? Dr. Veltar shook his head firmly. Impossible, student Velara. Millions of years of evolution cannot be hidden by a few generations of social development. The instincts would always be there, barely contained beneath the surface. Under stress, their true nature would emerge. Emily almost smiled at this. Humans did have predatory instincts, but they had also evolved strong social bonds and protective behaviors. When humans were under stress, they usually became more protective of others, not more aggressive toward them. A Threnody student in the middle of the hall ruffled her bright feathers nervously before speaking. Professor, you mentioned emotional bonding makes these predators more dangerous. But couldn't emotions also make them better? What if they cared about protecting other species? Dr. Veltar paused, considering the question with academic interest. Theoretically possible, student Kirath, but highly unlikely. Predatory emotions are focused on the immediate pack or family group. They lack the brain development necessary for abstract concepts like universal compassion or interspecies cooperation. Emily thought about human history, how her people had gradually expanded their definition of family from small tribes to entire nations, and eventually to all of humanity. Now, serving in Federation space, many humans considered all intelligent life worth protecting. But she kept these thoughts to herself. A crystalline Zelf flickered nervously before asking, what if such predators evolved beyond their primitive nature? Could they develop true civilization? Evolution doesn't work that quickly, Dr. Veltar replied with certainty. Behavioral instincts embedded over millions of years cannot be overridden in just a few thousand years. The violence would always be there, waiting to surface when their survival was threatened. Emily finally decided to speak. She raised her hand and waited to be acknowledged. When Dr. Veltar nodded to her, she asked in her carefully controlled voice, Professor, what if a predator species learned to channel their protective instincts toward other species? What if their hunting skills were used for defending the weak instead of attacking them? The question caused a stir throughout the hall. Several students turned to look at Emily with interest. Dr. Veltar himself seemed intrigued by the complexity of the question. That's quite a sophisticated hypothesis, Miss Watson, he said thoughtfully. But I'm afraid it assumes a level of moral development that would be impossible for a true predator species. Their brain structure simply wouldn't support such abstract thinking. A Nith student near the front added, besides, even if they tried to be helpful, their methods would still be violent. A predator's solution to every problem is to hunt and kill. Emily felt a flash of irritation at this assumption. Human peacekeepers in Federation space were specifically trained in non-violent conflict resolution. Human doctors worked tirelessly to save lives rather than take them. Human engineers built hospitals and schools rather than weapons. Dr. Veltar nodded at the Nith student's comment. Exactly right, student Tomere. The fundamental nature cannot change. A predator might claim to be protecting others, but their methods would inevitably involve violence and destruction. They would be a danger to the very people they claim to help. Another student, a gentle tree-like Verdani, asked in a whisper-soft voice, what if we encountered such creatures in Federation space? How would we know? The signs would be obvious, Dr. Veltar assured the frightened plant being. Increased aggression, territorial disputes, violence as a first response to problems. They simply couldn't maintain a peaceful facade for long periods. Emily looked around at her classmates and realized how little they understood about controlled aggression and disciplined strength. They saw violence as inherently evil, unable to imagine that the same instincts that made humans dangerous predators also made them fierce protectors of the innocent. As questions continued, Emily noticed the recurring theme: every student assumed that predatory nature automatically meant evil intentions. None of them could imagine that the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy might also be its most dedicated guardians. The final lecture ended with thunderous applause from the packed auditorium. Dr. Veltar had spent the session summarizing his week-long exploration of Deathworld predators, leaving his students both fascinated and terrified by the theoretical dangers lurking at the edges of civilized space. As hundreds of students began filing out of the hall in chattering groups, Emily remained in her seat, pretending to review her notes. She had done this after every lecture, waiting for the crowds to thin before making her exit. But today felt different. Today, she found herself genuinely curious about something. Dr. Veltar was packing up his equipment when he noticed the quiet human student still sitting in the back row. Over the 5 lectures, he had grown increasingly interested in Miss Watson. Her questions were always thoughtful and showed a deep understanding of predator psychology that impressed him. "Miss Watson," he called out as the last few students left the hall. "Do you have a moment?" Emily looked up from her tablet and nodded. She gathered her things and walked down to the front of the lecture hall, her soft footsteps barely making a sound on the polished floor. Dr. Veltar watched her approach, noting absently how smoothly she moved, like someone who was always aware of her surroundings. "I wanted to thank you for your participation this week," the professor said, setting down his data tablets. "Your questions showed real insight into predator behavior. What's your academic background?" Emily smiled politely, the same expression she had worn throughout her 6 months at the academy. "Comparative psychology and evolutionary biology, Professor. I find predator behavior patterns particularly interesting." "Ah, that explains it," Dr. Veltar nodded approvingly. "And what world are you from? I don't recall seeing your species designation in my class roster." For just a moment, Emily's carefully maintained expression flickered. Then she looked directly at him with those distinctly forward-facing eyes. "Earth, Professor. Sol system, 3rd planet from the star." Dr. Veltar frowned slightly, running the name through his memory. "Earth, that sounds familiar. Is it one of the newer Federation members?" "Very new," Emily confirmed. "We only made contact 5 years ago. Most species haven't heard of us yet." Something in her tone made Dr. Veltar pause. He activated his portable database and searched for Earth in the planetary classification system. When the results appeared, his forearms went very still. "Sol 3. Earth." He read slowly from the screen. "Class 12 Deathworld. Extreme weather systems, massive predators, toxic atmospheric variations." His voice trailed off as he looked up at Emily. For the first time in 5 days, Emily stopped trying to appear harmless. She stood to her full height, shoulders back, and met his gaze directly. "That's right, Professor." The realization hit Dr. Veltar like a physical blow. Every characteristic he had described over the past week, the forward-facing eyes, the bipedal locomotion, the omnivorous teeth, the persistence hunting, the pack bonding, the emotional responses to threats, it was all standing right in front of him. "You're," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Human," Emily finished calmly. "One of those theoretical Deathworld predators you've been lecturing about." Dr. Veltar's database showed him more information about Earth, gravity twice that of most inhabited worlds, weather patterns that included massive storms and temperature extremes, an ecosystem filled with creatures that would be classified as apex predators on any other planet. And somehow, one of the species that had evolved in that nightmare environment was standing in his lecture hall, discussing predator psychology. "Your entire lecture series was quite accurate," Emily continued conversationally. "Though you did underestimate a few things about us." What things?" Dr. Veltar managed to ask, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Emily began counting on her fingers. "Our pack bonding instincts, for one. Humans don't just protect our immediate families. We've been known to risk our lives for complete strangers, even for abstract ideas like justice or freedom." She paused. "And our definition of pack is much larger than you assumed." "How large?" the professor whispered. Emily's smile showed those omnivorous teeth he had described in such detail. "These days? Every intelligent species in the galaxy." The implications of this statement crashed over Dr. Veltar like a wave. "You consider all of us, your pack? Why do you think we joined the Federation?" Emily asked gently. "We could have stayed on Earth, built our own empire, conquered weaker species. Instead, we chose to become peacekeepers, doctors, teachers, engineers. We chose to protect others instead of dominating them." Dr. Veltar's mind raced through everything he knew about recent Federation history. The mysterious new peacekeeping units that had solved several interstellar conflicts through sheer determination. The medical teams that worked in impossible conditions to save lives. The engineers who built infrastructure on worlds other species considered too dangerous to visit. "How many of you are there?" he asked weakly. "In Federation space?" "About 800 right now," Emily replied. "We've been here for years, Professor. Your screening algorithms never flagged us because we're not the monsters you described. We're the Guardians." She picked up her bag and slung it over her shoulder with casual strength that now seemed far more significant. You were right about one thing, though. When our pack is threatened, we do become dangerous. But our pack includes everyone in this galaxy now. As Emily walked toward the exit, she paused at the door. There's something else you should know about humans, Professor. We don't just never give up when we're hunting. We never give up when we're protecting either. Dr. Veltar stood alone in the empty lecture hall, surrounded by his equipment and data about theoretical predators. He realized that the most dangerous creatures in known space had been sitting in his classroom, working in Federation hospitals, serving on peacekeeping missions, and quietly protecting a galaxy that had no idea they existed. The perfect Deathworld predators had been there all along, and they had chosen to become the perfect guardians instead.